It is said the sea does not remember the way we do. Not with names, not with dates, not with the sharp edges of stories told in daylight. It remembers with weight, with salt, with the slow turning of water over stone. On a moonlit shoreline, the tide draws its circles as if practicing a quiet spell, spiral upon spiral, brushing the sand smooth, erasing footprints the way centuries erase empires. The air is cool and hushed, and the waves do not crash, they breathe. A fishing boat rests far out on the dark glass of the Aegean, no more than a drifting thought, and above it the sky holds its starlight like a patient lantern. Whispers tell us a question lives inside such nights, a question that does not demand an answer, only listening. What does the sea keep when empires forget? Beneath the silence, the Aegean is not merely water. It is a veil, salted, heavy, sacred. To enter it, truly enter it, is to pass through a gate without stone or hinge. The surface is a boundary like the edge of sleep, one side crowded with voices, the other side filled with a deeper hush. And somewhere below, in the dim chamber of the seabed, the past lies folded, not as a tidy record, but as scattered offerings, crumbled, veiled, and star-marked by chance. Long ago, a ship surrendered here, not in a thunder of heroic drama, not as a tale shouted across a crowded hall, but as a quiet yielding, which softened. Ropes gave way, the hull filled, slowly at first, as though deciding. Then the sea did what the sea always does, it received. It took the ship down into its own manner of darkness, and time drifted over the wreck, like kelp over a sleeping statue, layer by layer, gentle as a covering cloth. The focus is not the sinking. It is the after. Amphorae settle into the sand with the calm inevitability of fallen clay moons. Marble faces, once lifted towards sunlit squares, turned downward, their features smoothing under centuries of water, their eyes closed by silt. Bronze objects lose their bright certainty, taking on the sea's palette, faded copper, green patina, the soft bruise colors of oxidized time. And among these familiar shapes, among cargo meant for trade or tribute, something smaller waits, something that does not look like wonder at first, just a lump, a crust, a green fragment that could be dismissed as common metal, forgotten, buried, crumbled into the seabed's patient dust. Where memory fades, miracles often arrive disguised. It is said that corrosion can be a kind of mask, a veil the sea places over what it wishes to keep hidden. This is how the object sleeps, wrapped in salt and silence, its edges softened, its surface roughened until it resembles stone. Yet beneath that hardened skin, something intricate lies folded inward. Gears, teeth, wheels within wheels, as if a clock learned to masquerade as a relic, as if starlight learned to hide inside bronze. And here, the contradiction begins to stir like a faint ripple. We are often taught to imagine the ancient world in warm flickers, torchlight on stone, myth spoken in echoes, temples breathing incense into the night. We remember marble and poetry, ships and spears, the slow dignity of ruins. But this small object, sleeping among amphorae, suggests another strand of that world, one that measured as well as prayed, measured the moon, counted the months, followed the spiraling paths of the heavens with patient attention, not to conquer the sky, perhaps, but to understand its rhythm, to align human breath with celestial breath, to make the vastness a little more legible, a little more intimate. It is said the ancients watched the heavens as one listens to a distant hymn. Some listened with awe, some with fear, some with the quiet courage to write patterns in dust, to mark cycles with careful hands. And somewhere in that tradition, somewhere between sacred wonder and disciplined observation, an artisan and a thinker may have joined their skills and made a chamber of time that could fit inside the palms, a bronze universe, a calendar that turned like prayer beads, an eclipse shadow predicted in advance, not as omen, but as returning tide. Yet if such a thing existed, If this degree of craft and celestial understanding could be shaped into gears, then why does it feel like a stranger in our history? Why does it stand alone, like a single surviving note from a forgotten song? Perhaps it never stood alone. Perhaps the sea has simply been selective with its mercy. Perhaps fire and war swallowed the rest. Perhaps libraries burned, workshops fell silent, and only this one device, this one oracle made of teeth and wheels, slipped past the erasures, carried into darkness where time could not easily reach. The seabed is not a grave in the ordinary sense. It is a sanctuary of fragments. It is a place where objects can wait without being explained, where the past is allowed to remain incomplete, where an intricate thing can sleep for 2,000 years without anyone asking it to prove itself. Above the wreck, the sea continues its slow breathing. Waves pass like long thoughts. Moonlight trembles on the surface in thin, broken lines, and the world of air goes on, changing rulers, changing borders, changing languages, while below, the object rests, untroubled by all that motion. Beneath the silence, it begins its long sleep, not as a triumph, not as a solved riddle, but as a quiet invitation, sealed in salt, veiled in green patina, star-marked by time. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, or perhaps it waits for a gentler kind of listener. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And so the sea keeps its secret, turning it over in darkness, slowly, patiently, as sleep draws near. It is said there are gates that do not stand on land. No pillars, no carved lintel, only a boundary made of shimmering water, thin as a breath, deep as a vow. Marked by the moon, the sea becomes a mirror, and beneath that mirror begins the old world's hidden chamber. In gentle darkness, a diver descends, not as one falling, but as one stepping down slowly, as if walking a spiral staircase made of water and silence. The sea presses in around him like a slow hymn. Each meter is a softer room. Each breath is measured, steady, and small against the vastness. His helmet's glass becomes a round window into another century. Through that circle, the world of air recedes, and a new world emerges, one that has been waiting without impatience. The light from above thins, then fades, until only the diver's lantern remains, a modest flame of brightness in a cathedral of dusk-blue shadow. Whispers tell us a question arrives here like a soft knock, not demanding, only inviting. What if the past is not gone, only submerged? The lantern sweeps, and the seabed answers in images rather than words. Amphorae appear first, clay bodies resting in clusters like sleeping moons, half buried, their mouths sealed by sand. Marble shapes follow, pale and broken, their faces turned away as if choosing a private dream. Timbers, once confident lines of a ship, now lie softened and split, forming archways that the water drifts through again and again. The ruins do not look ruined. They look rested, as if the sea has not destroyed them so much as placed them gently into a long, unbroken pause. A chamber of offerings, a sanctuary without incense, where silt drifts like dust in a forgotten temple. The diver's lantern finds bronze fragments, greened and pitted, their surfaces filmed with salt and time. A statue's arm, a curved plate, a shape that might once have gleamed in sunlit courtyards, now quiet under the sea's patient hand. And then, something smaller, something that refuses to announce itself. A crusted mass, reluctant, heavy with water and silence. It clings to the seabed as if it belongs there, as if it has taken root in sand. The diver sees it and, for a moment, sees nothing. Just debris. A stone-like lump. An ordinary fragment among countless ordinary fragments. This becomes the chapter's quiet tension. How easily forbidden knowledge can pass as ordinary stone. Beneath the silence, the sea is an expert in disguise. It can turn bronze into green rock. It can seal precision inside corrosion. It can make a miracle look like a mistake. The diver's lantern lingers. A crack in the crust catches the light. A sharp edge. A line of teeth-like shapes, too evenly spaced to be natural, too deliberate to be accident. The mind hesitates. The way it hesitates at the edge of a dream that feels strangely true. The diver reaches closer. And still, the object refuses drama. It offers no sudden revelation, only weight. Only the stubborn texture of a thing that has slept a very long time. Then comes the lifting. Slow, careful, reverent, like lifting a relic from an altar. The object rises from its bed of sand, and water pours from it like memory. Silt blooms around it in a soft cloud, spiraling upward, as if the seabed exhales. The lantern light touches the wet surface, and for a breath-length moment, the crusted lump glimmers, with oxidized bronze, faded copper beneath sea-green patina. The gears are not fully seen yet. Only hinted, only suggested, like starlight behind a veil. But the feeling changes in the diver's chest. Curiosity becomes reverent unease, because the object feels too precise for the story we have learned to tell ourselves about the ancient world. Too intentional, too carefully made to be merely decorative or accidental. The Mediterranean, it is said, is a library without shelves. Its books are not paper, but stone and bronze. Its ink is not black, but salt. Its archives are not arranged, but scattered, preserved by darkness rather than by names. A keeper of relics, a guardian of contradictions. Here, history is not written. It is submerged. And this relic, this small, stubborn thing, feels like a page torn from a missing chapter. A chapter where ancient minds did more than worship and wonder. A chapter where they measured the sky's breath, where they shaped celestial rhythm into metal. The diver begins to ascend. Above, the surface shimmers soft, trembling light, like moonlit silk. The boundary returns, and with it the faint suggestion of the world we know. Air voices day. The lantern glow fades behind him as the sea grows brighter, thinner, less heavy. Below, the wreck remains. Amphory still sleeping. Marble still turned to darkness. Timbers still forming archways in slow water. But one secret is missing now. Its clockwork heart, still masked, still veiled, carried upward toward daylight. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was always meant to wait for a particular kind of gaze. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the diver rises, the sea closes behind him like a quiet door, keeping its remaining silence intact, while letting, just once, a small piece of its hidden scripture pass through the gate. It is said there are objects that arrive at our doorstep already wearing a disguise, not out of malice, but out of survival. Some relics come wrapped in gold and certainty. Others come wrapped in silence. And this one, this quiet visitor from the sea, arrived as green stone. The opening image is a museum table under soft light. The room is not loud. It is a chamber of careful breath, where footsteps are gentled by old wood floors, and the air seems to move more slowly, as if it too respects what rests here. Dust floats in the lamplight, like pale starlight, made solid. Somewhere beyond the edges of the table, drawers and shelves hold fragments of many lives, shards of amphory, broken marble, bronze pieces darkened by time. At the center lies a lump of corroded bronze, green as old seaweed. It rests like a silent comet that has fallen from an ancient sky, carrying a long journey inside its crust. No gleam, no triumph, only the stubborn dullness of oxidation, the thick, mineral skin that the sea paints over metal when it wishes to keep it hidden. A curator's breath becomes part of the scene, soft, almost reverent, because even breathing feels like a form of touch. Whispers tell us the question that arrives here is not sharp. It is gentle, almost tender. How many wonders arrive disguised as rust? This chapter is built around patience. The mechanism sits among other finds, and time repeats its slow ritual the way waves repeat their tide. Cataloging, sorting, labeling, storing, forgetting. It is not cruelty. It is simply the way human attention moves, drawn toward what announces itself, drifting away from what remains quiet. Days become months, months become years, and the green stone remains present and unseen. There is a paradox in museums beneath the silence. An artifact can be safely held and still be lost. Not lost to the sea, but lost to the gaze. Shelved inside the ordinary. reduced to a note in a ledger, a thing that exists in the room, yet not in the mind. But patience has its own kind of revelation, not the revelation of sudden lightning, but the slower kind, like a candle that brightens so gradually you don't notice the darkness leaving until it is already gone. One day, under soft light, the crust begins to change. A crack appears, thin as a drawn line, running through the corrosion like a seam in cloth. It is not dramatic. It is almost shy, but it is enough to suggest that the green stone is not stone at all. Beneath the silence, the veil parts by a fraction. Someone leans in, a scholar perhaps, or a careful hand trained to see what most eyes pass over. There is no rush, only that quiet posture of listening. The head inclined, the breath held, the mind softened into attention. The scholar does not discover it the way stories like to say. The scholar notices it, and that difference matters. A fragment breaks away, no more than a small plate of crust, falling aside like a shed skin. Underneath, the bronze is darker, older, and more intentional than anyone expected. And then, like a syllable in a long-forgotten language, the first gear teeth appear. Delicate, evenly spaced. Not random corrosion, not broken ornament. Teeth made to meet other teeth. As if the object is waking, not in a single moment, but in measured breaths, revealing itself tooth by tooth, line by line, like a sacred text being unsealed. Where memory fades, detail returns. Lines and markings begin to whisper. Faint rings, thin engravings, scratches that are not scratches, paths, scales, meanings. The surface, once only green and rough, becomes a field of symbols. And here, the chapter shifts into the sacredness of interpretation. To interpret an ancient object is to perform a kind of ritual, not a ritual of incense and chanting, but of humility, of admitting that the past does not speak plainly. It speaks in fragments, in echoes, in half-sentences, in metal that has been sleeping for centuries. Reading the mechanism becomes like reading stars, not the stars themselves, but their patterns, those delicate relationships that only become visible when you stop trying to force them into modern shapes. The scholar tries to hear what the object is saying without inventing too much, tries to let the artifact lead, tries to listen rather than conquer. And in that listening, another veil begins to move, because this is not a simple tool. It suggests a mind that counted the heavens, a mind that believed celestial cycles could be gathered, guided, translated into the turning of wheels, a mind that looked at the moon's changing face and thought, this can be measured, a mind that looked at eclipses, those sudden sacred shadows, and thought, this can be anticipated. Yet many histories describe ancient technology as simpler, earthbound, practical, limited. The mechanism introduces a gentle dissonance, the kind that feels dreamlike, like realizing a familiar room has an extra door you never noticed. It does not shout that our story is wrong. It simply offers a quieter possibility. Perhaps our story is incomplete. Perhaps brilliance did not always march forward. Perhaps it bloomed, then was scattered. Perhaps knowledge, like a ship, can sink. And perhaps only a few pieces float back. Emotionally, the chapter moves from skepticism to awe, but softly, without spectacle. The awe is not a loud applause. It is a hushed deepening, a candle slowly brightening, the feeling of standing at a threshold and not knowing which way it opens. The ending image is intimate. The mechanism's fractured face is revealed just enough to disturb certainty, not enough to answer every question, not enough to close the mystery, only enough to show that behind the green crust was always something precise, something made with intention. The green stone becomes a gate, and behind it, something waits. Starlight carved into bronze, a cosmos folded into a palm-sized chamber, a whisper of ancient minds who once counted the sky. Perhaps it was never meant to be recognized quickly. Perhaps it was meant to teach patience, first to the sea, and then to us. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the soft museum light, with dust floating like quiet constellations, the mechanism rests again, still veiled, still sacred, awake only enough to remind us that history is full of hidden doors, and not all of them open at once. It is said some prayers are not spoken. They are turned. They are measured out in careful intervals, like breath counted in a dark room, like footsteps taken softly so as not to wake the sleeping world. We open close, so close it feels almost intimate. Ear teeth aligned like a quiet procession. Not jagged, not violent, but precise and strangely gentle, as though each tooth has learned restraint. Under soft light, the metal holds its age openly, oxidized bronze green like old seaweed, faded copper peeking through where the patina thins. Dust gathers in the grooves like the last ash of a candle, and the teeth, each one a small, deliberate shape, stand together as if waiting to be read. Whispers tell us the question arrives here like a lullaby. What does it mean to give time a body? Once, the mechanism was only a lump, a green stone that was not stone. Now it is a hidden city of circles. As the corrosion parts and the fragments are studied, the interior reveals itself in layers, the way a temple reveals its chambers. First the outer threshold, then the inner hall, then the sacred room, where the air feels different, quieter, heavier with meaning. We begin a slow walk through this bronze labyrinth, not rushing, not claiming too much. Each gear is not merely a part. It is an inhabitant, a wheel that has a place, a duty, a small role in a larger ritual. Each tooth is a syllable in a prayer written without ink. Each ring is a path traced by the sky, folded into metal. Beneath the silence, the mechanism does not feel like a machine from a modern world. It feels like a shrine built for cycles. And around it, history appears softly, never as a lecture, only as a distant echo. We remember that the ancient Greeks watched the heavens with patient eyes. They marked the turning of seasons not to impress, but to live, to plan at the right time, to sail under the right stars, to align festivals with the moon's returning face. Greek astronomy, so often imagined as chalk on stone, words on scroll, was also a discipline of attention, of looking up, of waiting, of noticing what repeats. The sky was not a random ceiling. It was a pattern, a breathing thing. And here, inside this bronze chamber, that pattern is made touchable. The gears suggest months. They suggest the moon's slow changes, waxing, waning, returning again. They hint at calendars and sacred days, at civic rhythms and temple rituals. We can almost hear distant bells in the imagination, not bells of metal, but bells of time, the appointed moments when a city's life turned with the heavens. Ships, too, live by cycles, departing when winds were kind, trusting the familiar stars, measuring distance by what the night revealed. In such a world, to hold celestial rhythm in the hand would be more than cleverness. It would be comfort, a way to reconcile the human with the immense. This is the mystery, not only how it was made, but why. Why build something so intricate? Perhaps it was an act of devotion, disguised as craft. Perhaps it was an attempt to tame fear, gently, by turning it into pattern. Eclipses, for instance, those sudden sacred shadows, could unmake certainty in a single breath. The sun dimming at midday, the world feeling briefly unreal. For many, an omen. For some, terror. But for a few minds trained in patience, an eclipse was also a cycle, a shadow that could be anticipated, counted, placed into a rhythm like a drumbeat heard from far away. To predict such darkness is not to banish mystery. It is to give mystery a shape. A body made of bronze, a chamber where the sky's vast breath can be translated into the turning of wheels. The mechanism becomes a mediator, a quiet interpreter between starlight and human hands. And yet, beneath this wonder, another thought stirs. A soft contradiction, like a hidden draft in a sealed room. If such craftsmanship existed, where are its siblings? Why does history feel like it skipped a chapter? We have epics of war, scrolls of philosophy, temples whose stones still catch the sun. But where are the other machine temples? The other bronze prayers? The other clockworks that might have sat on tables and workshops near the sea? Beneath the silence, we begin to sense the fragility of knowledge, how easily it can be exiled. A workshop can burn, a library can collapse, a teacher can vanish without passing the flame. And the sea, patient and unbothered, can take an entire cargo of ideas and store them in darkness for centuries, like a vault that does not announce itself. Perhaps the mechanism was once part of a lineage, a tradition of makers and thinkers, hands that filed gear teeth with devotion, minds that translated the heavens into ratios. Perhaps there were other devices, other variations, other hidden cities of circles, and perhaps they are gone, lost to fire, lost to conquest, lost to the ordinary forgetting that follows every empire. The emotional arc shifts here, almost without notice. Wonder becomes tinged with melancholy, because the mechanism is not only a marvel, it is a survivor. A single surviving note from a song mostly erased. It tells us not only what was possible, but what disappeared. And so we return to stillness. The gears, in their present state, do not turn. They rest under glass, silent and patient, like a constellation seen through thin cloud. Their teeth remain aligned, their language intact but quiet, waiting for hands that understand their grammar, waiting for minds that can hear the prayer beneath the metal. Where memory fades, the mechanism remains, not as an answer, but as an invitation. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully solved. Perhaps it was meant to keep one veil in place, so the wonder could remain. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the dim light, soft as a candle's final glow, the bronze city of circles settles back into its hush as sleep approaches, leaving us suspended in that sacred uncertainty. Time given a body, and yet still beyond our grasp. It is said there are nights when the world becomes a mirror, a night sky over calm water, stars above, stars below, so perfectly reflected that you cannot tell where heaven ends and the sea begins. The horizon dissolves into mist, and the air feels like a thin veil drawn across a sacred face. And between the two skies, between the starlight overhead and the starlight trembling beneath, there rests a small box of bronze, weathered, fractured, quiet, a relic that dares to imitate the heavens. Marked by the moon, it catches a soft glint along its oxidized edges, and for a moment it looks less like an artifact and more like a sealed chamber, something meant to hold a secret, not of gold, but of rhythm. Whispers tell us the question here is simple, almost sacred. Can the infinite be mapped without losing its soul? Beneath the silence, the mechanism becomes a portable cosmos. Not because it contains the sky, no box could do that, but because it offers a language for sky things. Dials shaped like moons, rings engraved like paths, scales that spiral like seasons unwinding slowly, one after another, with the patient inevitability of tides. Inside this bronze chamber, time is not a straight line. It is a circle, a returning, a hymn to repetition. We move through it as though walking the edge of a ritual pool, watching the reflections change. Each dial hints at a calendar, the months stepping forward like quiet pilgrims. Each gear suggests that the moon, too, can be followed, not with grasping hands, but with attentive eyes. And the longing beneath it is not control. It is listening. The human longing to predict is often misunderstood. It is not always a hunger for dominion. Sometimes it is simply the desire to anticipate the next breath of the world, to know when winter will soften, when the sea will welcome a ship, when the sky will dim and then return. In the ancient Mediterranean, the heavens were not decoration. They were guidance. Sailors watched the Pleiades, those clustered lights that seemed to gather like a small council in the darkness. They watched them rise and set, and from that motion they took courage. They timed departures and returns not only by maps of coastline, but by maps of starlight held in memory. Farmers read dawn's color. They watched the first pale band of light spread across the horizon, and they sensed the season turning. The smell of the air, the weight of dew, the angle of sunbeams and mist, all of it was a kind of scripture, written daily and rewritten again. Priests marked festivals by the moon's path. They watched the moon wax and wane like a slow opening and closing eye. They listened for the moments when ritual and sky aligned, when offerings felt properly timed, when the sacred calendar clicked into place, as if the cosmos itself had nodded in agreement. Omen and observation were not enemies. They were braided strands. Myth and measurement lived together, woven into daily life like threads in a single cloth. A story could explain why the moon mattered. A calculation could explain when it would return. Both were forms of reverence. Both were ways of admitting that the sky was larger than us, and yet still meaningful to our small lives. And so the mechanism becomes a bridge between prayer and pattern, between reverent wonder and disciplined attention, between the language of temples and the language of gears. Yet a gentle tension rises, like fog lifting just enough to reveal a distant shape, because the device seems too advanced for the tidy timeline we carry. We like our histories clean, simple beginnings, steady progress, modern brilliance. We prefer a straight road. But this mechanism suggests history may be something else entirely, more like a shoreline after high tide. What remains visible is only what the water chose to return. Beneath the silence, one begins to imagine workshops of remarkable skill, where bronze dust drifted like incense. Conversations between philosophers and craftsmen, one speaking of celestial cycles, the other shaping those cycles into teeth and wheels. Notebooks filled with diagrams and ratios, written by lamplight, pages smelling faintly of oil and sea air. And then fire, salt, loss, libraries burned, ships sank, names faded. The lineage broke, not because it was unworthy, but because time can be careless. The sea can be patient. History can misplace whole rooms of knowledge and never notice the draft. Curiosity becomes quiet reverence. The mechanism is no longer merely an object. It feels like an altar to cycles, a hymn to repetition, a reminder that the heavens have always been watched, not only for beauty, but for meaning, and that some minds, long ago, tried to honor that meaning by giving it form. In imagination, a hand turns a knob, not an actual hand, only the mind's gentle gesture. The dials move like slow planets, as if the moon's face is shifting under glass. Gear teeth meet gear teeth, with a silent kiss. A spiral scale advances, season by season, patient and exact. And outside that imagined motion, the real night sky remains vast, indifferent, beautiful. It allows itself to be copied, reflected, approximated, but never fully contained. Perhaps it was never meant to be contained. Perhaps the mechanism was not a cage, but a prayer, an attempt to touch the edge of infinity without tearing it. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the stars continue their quiet turning above the water, the bronze box rests between two skies, holding not the heavens themselves, but a soft, sacred reminder. Even when we measure the cosmos, the mystery remains, watching us gently as sleep approaches. It is said the world can sense an eclipse before it arrives, not with the mind, but with the skin. A hush settles into the day, as if the air itself becomes careful. Birds grow unsettled, their flight turning uncertain, as though they have forgotten the shape of the sky. The light thins, so slowly you almost doubt it, until colors begin to look borrowed, as if the sun is retreating behind a veil. Even the sea seems to pause. The surface lies calm, holding a dim reflection like tarnished silver, and the shoreline ruins, broken columns, crumbled stone, stand at a quiet attention, as if they too are waiting. Beneath the silence, a question arrives like a secret passed from mouth to ear. Did the ancients build this to foresee darkness? For a moment, let the eclipse be what it has always been in the human heart, not a spectacle, a sacred interruption, a closing eyelid in the heavens. In ancient times, the sun was not merely a star, it was a promise. It rose again and again, reliable as breath. When that promise faltered, when the day dimmed at midday, certainty itself seemed to loosen. The world, so brightly defined, became strange and delicate, as if reality had softened at its edges. Whispers tell us that people once met eclipses with fear, a dragon swallowing the sun, a divine warning, a rupture in the order of things. In some places, drums were beaten to frighten away the shadow. In others, prayers rose like smoke, urgent and trembling. The eclipse became a mirror for human anxiety, proof that even the sky could change its mind. And yet, beneath the myths, another tradition breathed quietly, a tradition of pattern, of careful noticing. Some minds, patient, reverent, and unhurried, looked at eclipses and wondered not only why, but when. They listened to the sky as if it spoke in cycles, not in chaos. They watched the moon's returning phases, the sun's steady path, the slow mathematics of celestial alignment. They did not seek to banish mystery. They sought to understand its rhythm. And here, in the shadowed chambers of the Antikythera Mechanism, we sense that quiet ambition, to track the heavens' solemn interruptions, to know when the shadow would return. The mechanism does not shout. It does not proclaim a conquest over fate. It suggests something softer, that darkness itself has a schedule, that the sun and moon in their immense dance meet again and again on hidden steps, rare, solemn, but not random. The gears and engraved rings become a kind of compromise between fate and formula. The heavens remain sacred, but their movements can be read, like a hymn whose verses repeat. Beneath the silence, imagine the device as it once was, not corroded, not fractured, but whole, its bronze surfaces warm under lamplight. A scholar's finger might have traced its markings the way a priest traces sacred text. A craftsman might have listened to its turning, gear teeth meeting with a gentle certainty. The mechanism would not have replaced awe. It would have guided awe into calm. It would have allowed a city to prepare, to know that the sun's dimming was temporary, that the world would not end, that the eye of the sky would open again. And yet a contradiction drifts in, soft as fog over water. If such predictions were possible in bronze, why did later centuries speak as if eclipses were unknowable terrors? Why does the human story sometimes move backward into fear? The answer is not a single event. It is a veil of many threads. Politics, wars, lost teachers, libraries burned and workshops silenced, notebooks swallowed by fire or salt, devices drowned as cargo, scattered into the sea's library without shelves. Civilizations do not simply progress in a straight, shining line. They forget, then remember, then forget again, like waking from a dream and losing it, then catching a fragment of it later in the day. Where memory fades, the old knowledge becomes legend, a thing half believed, half feared. And so eclipses return to the realm of omen, until patient minds, centuries later, would learn again what had once been quietly known, that shadows, too, obey rhythms. Emotionally, the chapter moves as the eclipse itself moves, from a small dread, tight in the chest, like a held breath, into calm acceptance. If darkness can be predicted, perhaps it can also be endured. Perhaps fear is softened not by denying it, but by giving it shape. Outside, the eclipse passes in slow motion. The dimness reaches its deepest hush. The world holds still, stone, sea, and sky suspended together. Then, almost imperceptibly, light begins to return, not in a rush, but gently, as if the sun is remembering its promise. Colors warm again. Birds find their direction. The sea resumes its breathing. And the mechanism, resting now under glass, in the quiet care of a museum, remains still. Its gears do not turn in the room. Its teeth stand aligned, patient as ever. Yet in imagination it moves, counting the next shadow with serene precision, measuring the rhythm of the heavens without raising its voice, holding, within its bronze chambers, a whisper that feels both ancient and comforting. The darkness returns, and it also passes. Perhaps it was never meant to remove mystery, only to steady the heart. Perhaps it was meant to teach that even sacred interruptions have their cycles. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the last image lingers, the sky vast and indifferent, the sea calm and deep, and within a small relic's silent geometry, the quiet mathematics of fate, turning softly, somewhere beyond the veil. It is said every great mystery begins with a door, not a grand gate in a palace wall, but a simple threshold, wood-worn smooth by time, stone edges softened by countless footsteps, a door that opens onto a room where history is made quietly, without applause. In a narrow street of an ancient port, there is such a door, half in moonlight, half in smoke. The alley smells faintly of salt and lamp oil. The stones hold the day's warmth, and somewhere beyond the buildings, The sea breathes against the harbor walls. A thin veil of haze drifts through the street, carrying the whisper of distant conversation, the creak of rigging, the hush of waves. The door stands open. Inside, a workshop hums, not loudly, not like a market, but like a private prayer. The air is threaded with metal dust, drifting in lamplight like pale starlight caught indoors. Tools are arranged with a calm precision. Calipers, compasses, chisels, each placed as if part of a ritual set, as if the table is an altar dedicated to measure and form. Beneath the silence, the question arrives. Who made a cosmos that fit in the hands, and why did their name dissolve? We begin the search for the unseen maker. But we do not pin certainty to the wall like a trophy. We move through possibilities the way lantern light moves across stone, slowly, respectfully, allowing shadows to keep their secrets. Perhaps Rhodes, the island city that once held a famous bronze colossus in its harbor's gaze, a place where ships arrived heavy with goods and ideas, where scholars studied the sky, and craftsmen knew how to make metal obey. Rhodes is often whispered in connection with astronomy and learning, a shoreline where knowledge could meet craft. Or perhaps another port, another workshop, another room where the sea's breath mixed with the warmth of a brazier, and where the heavens were translated into bronze not by kings, but by patient hands. We imagine those hands, not as a single hero, but as a lineage. Hands shaping bronze plates, smoothing them until they felt like the surface of still water. Hands filing gear teeth with devotion, one tooth at a time, each spacing deliberate, as if the act itself required reverence. Hands engraving markings that would later be read like scripture. Rings, scales, star-marked lines, a subtle spiral. Quiet geometry meant to hold the rhythm of months and the returning shadows of eclipses. This is not the romance of invention as a sudden lightning strike. It is the reality of craft as slow ceremony. It is said the ancients understood that precision is a kind of patience, that to shape time, you must first submit to time. You must allow repetition to teach you. You must let the smallest movements, file against metal, chisel against plate, become a meditation. And the mechanism, even now, carries that devotion in its teeth. Yet the mystery deepens, through absence. The artifact exists. The biography does not. We can hold the bronze and still not touch the maker's name. We can study the gears and still never hear the voice that once spoke over this table. History often preserves kings and wars, temples and conquests, names carved high in stone where weather cannot easily erase them. But the quiet brilliance of craftsmen often dissolves. Their names were written in dust, not marble. Their legacy lived in objects, fragile things that could be stolen, burned, drowned, or forgotten. The mechanism becomes a witness to a familiar betrayal. The world remembers power, but forgets patience. Historical context drifts in like soft silhouettes. The Hellenistic world, after Alexander, was a wide, braided tapestry of cultures and ideas. Libraries gathered scrolls like constellations. Debates rose in shaded colonnades. Philosophers spoke of order and nature, of spheres and cycles. Astronomers watched the heavens with careful eyes, noting what returned. And somewhere near the edge of that intellectual glow, a workshop like this one could exist, where thought and craft met in the same breath. A craftsman does not need to write a treatise to understand the sky. He needs only to listen, to learn the ratios that make circles speak, to understand how one wheel can carry the meaning of another, to translate celestial rhythm into metal so faithfully that the object itself becomes a kind of forbidden knowledge, not forbidden because it is evil, but because it is rare, delicate, and vulnerable to loss. A gust of conquest could extinguish it. A shipwreck could bury it. A generation without a teacher could break the line. And so the emotional arc shifts gently, admiration turning into quiet grief, because the maker becomes a ghost behind the artifact. We can imagine him, the smoke in his hair, the bronze dust on his skin, the lamplight in his eyes, but we cannot name him. He steps backward into the long corridor of time, and the door closes softly behind him. Where memory fades, the workshop fades too. The tools quiet. The brazier cools. The dust settles. and yet the object remains, still turning in spirit, long after the maker's breath has vanished. Its gears hold their alignment, like a prayer remembered. Its engraved rings keep their silent testimony that once, in a room without a name, someone tried to fold the sky into a box, not to conquer it, but to honor it. Perhaps it was never meant to be credited. Perhaps it was meant only to endure. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the lamplight dwindles in our imagination, the unnamed workshop slips into darkness again, leaving us with the quiet wonder of a relic that survived and a maker who became, like so many, a sacred absence. It is said some dreams repeat because they are unfinished. And so we begin again beneath the waves, returning to the shipwreck as one returns to a familiar sleep, one that still holds an unresolved meaning, one that keeps opening the same door in the mind, only to reveal another corridor. The seabed is quiet, not empty, never empty, but quiet in the way a sacred hall is quiet when the candles have burned low. Sand drifts across amphory like slow snowfall. The grains move in spirals, as if the sea itself is breathing out dust, arranging and rearranging the past without ever speaking. Beneath the silence, a question rises, soft as silt. How many futures sank here uncounted? The wreck is often described as an accident, but in the water's dim chamber, it feels more like an archive, a museum with no walls, a collection without labels, a place where objects meant to travel onward have been asked to remain. Statues, goods, bronze pieces, each carried toward a destination that never arrived. The ship's cargo is scattered like offerings, and each object seems to hold a quiet implication. I was meant for another room. Amphory were meant to be opened. Marble faces were meant to be seen by eyes in daylight. Bronze was meant to gleam in a courtyard or a temple. And among them, one relic shifts the mood of everything around it. The Antikythera Mechanism. It lies not as a treasure, but as a question. Because if this device was traveling, it suggests something more than commerce. It suggests the movement of knowledge. It suggests a world where such instruments were valued, exchanged, perhaps even commissioned, where the sky could be folded into bronze and placed, carefully, among cargo bound for elsewhere. The wreck becomes a crossroads of invisible roads, trade routes and learning routes, routes of craft and philosophy, all converging here, then vanishing into the sea. Whispers tell us the Mediterranean is a library without shelves, a keeper of relics, a gatekeeper. Salt and pressure preserve and destroy at once. They harden wood into ghostly beams, and they dissolve iron into rust. They soften marble, and yet keep its features intact enough to still resemble a face. The sea is neither kind nor cruel, it is simply constant, and the silence is absolute. No witnesses remain, no record of the storm's voice, no inscription saying why the ship surrendered, only the long patience of water, holding the wreck the way sleep holds a thought, without explanation, without conclusion. The mystery expands, not by adding answers, but by widening the unknown. If the mechanism was in transit, then it had a destination. Where was it going? To a wealthy patron, perhaps. Someone who wanted the heavens on a table, the moon's cycles made touchable. To a library, where it might have sat among scrolls, admired as a marriage of craft and philosophy. To a classroom, where a teacher could turn a knob and let students watch time move in bronze. To a temple, where the device might have been treated not as a tool, but as an altar to the sky. Each possibility opens an imagined chamber. Each imagined chamber remains unopened, because the ship did not arrive. The door was never crossed. The hand that waited to receive it never knew it was coming. And so the mechanism lies here, among amphory and marble, as an orphan cosmos, delivered only to the sea. The emotional journey turns quietly melancholic, because survival is not always comforting. The mechanism's survival is also a reminder of what did not survive, writings that could have explained it, companions that could have contextualized it, other instruments, other clockworks, that the sea did not spare or the land later forgot. Perhaps there were notes, diagrams, debates, names spoken in workshops. Perhaps there were other devices, now only as corrosion dissolved into nothing. We call this mechanism unique, but uniqueness may be an illusion created by loss. When a shoreline is stripped by a storm, a single shell looks rare, not because it was the only one, but because it is the only one left. Beneath the silence, the wreck teaches a gentle lesson. History is not merely what happened. It is what survived. And survival is selective, unpredictable, sometimes unfair. The sea keeps what it keeps, and it does not tell us why. It returns one relic and swallows 10. It preserves a gear tooth and dissolves a page. Still, the wreck remains an archive, a museum of lost roads. We pull back in a mind's eye, drifting upward through the dim water. The amphory grows smaller. The marble faces blur into pale shapes. The mechanism becomes a faint oxidized glint, barely visible, like a star seen through fog. Sand continues its slow snowfall. The wreck settles back into darkness, and the sea keeps its collection without judgment. Above, the world moves on, building new ships, telling new stories, forgetting old ones. Below, history remains unfinished, sacred, and quietly out of reach. Perhaps it was never meant to be complete. Perhaps it was meant to leave us suspended, listening for what cannot be recovered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the deep where memory fades, the museum of lost roads stays open, silent, patient, waiting beneath the veil. It is said there are rooms where the night is not empty. Rooms where darkness does not mean absence, but attention. A quiet laboratory room. Late at night, the world outside has softened. Streets have gone still. The sky has turned to deep dusk blue, and the glass of the windows holds faint reflections like distant water. Inside, lamps glow like small moons, steady, warm, and patient. Their light falls in gentle circles, pooling on a table scattered with papers that spread like pale wings. No voices rise here, only the hush of paper and breath. And at the center, the relic rests. Not whole, not triumphant. Fragments of corroded bronze, green by time, cracked and pitted like shoreline rock. Gear teeth peek through the patina like hidden syllables. Engraved rings lie broken, their lines faint but deliberate, as if the metal still remembers the hand that traced them. Beneath the silence, a question is whispered, not asked loudly, not demanded. How do you translate a silence made of metal? This chapter follows the modern act of listening. Not listening with ears alone, but with patience. Scholars examine the fragments as one might examine an ancient scroll that is burned at the edges. They do not force it open. They do not rush to claim certainty. They lean closer. They let light skim the surface, revealing what the eye misses in haste. The fine pores of corrosion, the hairline cracks, the delicate geometry beneath the green veil. They align pieces, not like a puzzle solved for fun, but like a ritual performed for memory. The pace remains meditative, less about technology, more about devotion. No grand declarations, no loud victory. Only careful attention. Only the humility required to admit uncertainty without shame. Because the mechanism does not surrender easily. It yields in partial answers. A marking here, faint star-like lettering, almost erased, as if the sea tried to rub it away. A ring there, its curve suggesting a scale, a calendar, a returning cycle, a gear ratio that feels too intentional to be random, too poetic to be merely practical. Each discovery reveals another veil, and behind each veil, another question. The mechanism becomes a broken hymn, beautiful even in fragments. Its language is not fully spoken, but still it sings, through the alignment of teeth, through the repetition of circles, through the quiet insistence that someone once cared enough to make the heavens measurable. Sometimes the scholars pause. They sit back, letting the room breathe. Lamplight trembles slightly, and dust motes drift through the beam like tiny constellations. The papers on the table, sketches, notes, diagrams, remain pale and open, as if waiting for the next sentence to arrive. And in those pauses, something spiritual enters the work, not in the form of superstition, in the form of restraint, because to study the past is to stand at threshold, 1 foot in knowledge, 1 foot in mystery. The scholars know that some questions are not answered by force. Some truths unfold only when approached softly. We weave a contradiction here, gently, The past is often assumed to be simpler, a straight line leading to us. We imagine ancient technology as earthbound, as if the old world could only build in stone and speak in myth. Yet this object asks us to revise our inner map. It suggests that brilliance does not belong to one era. It rises, it falls, it disappears into shadow, it returns again in another form. Knowledge is not a straight road. It is a spiral staircase, sometimes rising into light, sometimes descending into darkness, sometimes turning so quietly you do not notice you have returned to a place you once believed was lost. The spiritual context appears most clearly through the act of reconstruction itself. The scholar becomes a modern priest of memory, not because the work is religious, but because it is reverent, because there is a sacredness in attempting to restore a relic to legibility without stealing its mystery. There is humility in accepting that the mechanism may never be fully solved in the satisfying way modern minds crave. To fully solve it might feel like closing a sacred book too quickly. It might feel like sealing a door that should remain slightly open, so that wonder can still drift through. So the scholars proceed with gentle hands and patient eyes. They let the artifact remain partly veiled. They accept incomplete understanding as a kind of truth. They learn to dwell in the space between certainty and awe, and slowly, like a tide that changes the shoreline without announcing itself, the mechanism yields some of its meaning. Enough to suggest calendars, enough to hint at eclipses, enough to show that it once held the sky in bronze, but not enough to make the mystery vanish. We close on a near silence. The fragments rest again on the table, their edges meeting and not meeting, their gaps like pauses in a chant. The lamp light grows softer. The room darkens by degrees, as if sleep is lowering its veil. Outside, the night remains vast. Inside, the scholar's work settles into stillness. Understanding, we are reminded, is a slow tide. The mechanism allows one shell to be found, while the rest remain buried. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully translated. Perhaps the rust is part of its message. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the gentle glow of those small moon lamps, the bronze hymn remains, unfinished, sacred, and quietly alive, waiting for the next patient gaze, waiting for the next soft breath of attention, as sleep approaches and the world becomes silent again. It is said the smallest marks can open the largest doors. A single gear tooth drawn in pencil, graphite on paper, soft, gray, humble, yet shaped with careful intent. The tooth is not merely a line. It is a promise of motion, a hint that something once turned. The paper holds the pressure of the hand that drew it, and the lamplight above makes the fibers glow like pale sand under moonlight. Beyond the edge of the desk, a window waits, and through it, the night sky spreads, dust blue and vast, stars scattered like quiet punctuation across an ancient sentence. The glass holds a faint reflection of the lamp, as if two worlds overlap, the small room of study and the endless room of the heavens. Beneath the silence, a gentle final thread is offered. What does this relic change in the way we dream of history? We sit with that question, not to solve it, but to let it settle. The Antikythera Mechanism, fractured bronze, oxidized green, teeth and rings and spirals, does not feel like a mere artifact anymore. It feels like an echo, a sound that crossed time and arrived late, softened by distance, still carrying meaning. In the mind, earlier images return like a familiar refrain. The wreck's hush beneath the waves, amphory sleeping under sand snowfall. The diver's lantern, one circle of light sweeping over a seabed that never speaks. The green crust splitting, like a veil parting by a fraction, revealing deliberate teeth. The hidden cosmos inside bronze, dials like moons, rings like seasons, a sky folded into a box. Each image returns gently, as if the story itself is turning on a slow spiral. And now the reflection widens. We begin to see the mechanism not only as a marvel of craft, but as a mirror held up to our assumptions. It is proof, quiet, unboastful, that ancient minds could build with extraordinary precision, that the past may not be as simple as we like to imagine, that our picture of history might be a softened myth of our own making, Not a lie, just an incomplete map. History, after all, is often what survives. What is burned becomes legend. What is drowned becomes silence. What is carried forward becomes normal. And what is lost becomes impossible. Beneath the silence, the mechanism asks us to revise our inner timeline, not with argument, but with presence. It sits there, real and undeniable, and it changes the emotional texture of the past. It suggests that brilliance can flicker in places we did not expect, that knowledge can bloom, then be scattered. That time is not a straight road. It is a spiral staircase, sometimes rising, sometimes descending into shadows. And in that spiral, the deep exploration turns inward, because the mechanism is not only about gears. It is about longing. Humanity has always looked up. We have always wanted to understand, not to conquer, but to belong, to anticipate the return of seasons, to know when the moon will change its face, to feel less alone beneath the immense roof of night. Time is not only measured, it is felt. It is carried in the chest as hope and dread, as patience and urgency. It lives in rituals, planting, sailing, fasting, feasting, moments aligned with the sky's rhythm. The mechanism becomes symbolic of that desire to align the heart with the heavens, to translate the vast into something touchable. And even when knowledge is lost, the longing remains. It reappears under different names, in different languages, in different rooms, like starlight crossing centuries. A delayed arrival, a softened glow, still reaching us. We keep the mystery intact. We do not claim final certainty, only a softened awe. Was this device unique, or one of many? Who held it last before the sea took it? What other instruments were swallowed without trace? Other clockworks, other bronze hymns, other pages from the missing chapter? The unanswered questions are treated here as sacred, not frustrating. Because some mysteries are not failures of understanding. They are invitations to humility. They remind us that the past is larger than our ability to explain it, and that not knowing can be a gentle state, one that keeps wonder alive. Emotionally, the chapter moves toward calm closure. Wonder settles into quiet acceptance, the way a wave settles back into the sea after touching the shore. We end with an image of slow turning, not an actual gear spinning, but the sensation of cycles continuing, moon phases returning, seasons unwinding, breath rising and falling in the dark. The sea keeps its hidden clockwork. The mechanism rests, still veiled, still whispering, and the listener drifts onward, carrying a thought as light as dust and lamplight. History is still alive, turning softly behind a veil. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully grasped. Perhaps it was meant to be felt, like the night sky beyond the window, vast and indifferent, yet always there. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the echo remains, gentle, sacred, and unending, like a bronze prayer turned quietly in a mind.